Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, the fortnightly conversation which delves deep into the issues impacting men today. We're here to have the conversations you might not be having elsewhere, honest, open, sometimes uncomfortable, but always important. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by Linda Tilson, a men's coach, had an amazing career, and today it's all about meeting Linda. So, Linda, thanks very much for joining me today. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about your story and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Look, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is thank you for having me on the other side of the podcast instead of the host role that I typically play with you guys. Really, my story, I would say, started when I was 12. I've always been someone that's a helper in the world, somebody that would speak up when they didn't have a voice. And so that is carried through into my adult life. But I have to tell you, my life didn't really begin at that early age. It just set the stage. My life, in my opinion, began when I turned 45. And so I've always said at 45, I came alive. And that's true. And the reason for that was because I am traditionally an accountant. So I do number crunching. Well, in that world, there came an opportunity to step up and lead teams, to help people on my team to come up into the workplace as their best self and really work on building their skill sets and then beyond. And so my role has always been to develop people. And at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is for them to outshine me. If I'm doing my job right, then they will do that.
Oh, absolutely love that. I love that way you coined it. I come alive at 45, coming alive at 45. That's really interesting. That makes me think, is that maybe the biggest time, the biggest age gap, when people come into coaching? Obviously, midlife crisis, transformation times, whatever you want to call it. Do you see a trend in that? Do you think that's what like one of the biggest trending ages, if that makes sense, for people to come into this sort of space or to have that level of enlightenment?
Well, for me, what it really was is because, you become seasoned in your career, you become seasoned in your life. And so whether you're, a parent or a grandparent, you're in that career trajectory where you're going from level to level to level, that lived experience. Like for me, there's another story inside a story. So the reason why I say what I do is because in my leadership journey, we had access on site to coaching. So executive coaching. And what I found really exciting was there was a coach on staff that taught find your spark. So there you go. So it wasn't a midlife crisis for me. It was find your spark. And so you would find out how you're intrinsically motivated. You would find what lights you up when you do it. And the thing that I liked most about that experience, that's where I wanted to become a coach. And not only did I go through the program myself, I took the whole program and I championed it with the team that I led at the time. And so that was the first time that I had taken a skill set and really applied it to my team. And then I thought, well, there's got to be more. And so that was the next thing that I did.
I love that. It's always great to hear other coaches' inspiration story, what inspired them to be a coach, if that makes sense. Did you ever have any other sort of models, anyone else who sort of inspired this? Maybe someone famous, a movie, something that was going on maybe in life in front of your eyes, something that made you go, right, this is what I want to do, because I love those stories. We're all here as coaches for the same reason, to help people, but what created that story, what was that light bulb moment, are always different. Everyone's story is different. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that, Linda. Talk to me a little bit more about that
Yes.
light bulb moment, that transformation moment.
I'm going to take you a little deeper. So that coach, to find your spark, that was where I said, hey, I love what I've been through. I love what my team's been through. And how do I get experience now that I'm midlife? I'm mid-career. How do I get into coaching? Does it require certification? Does it require special training? And the answer was very different than what I thought it was going to be. And the answer was go find a place in this space where you can go in and do what they call a lunch and learn. And I thought, well, that sounds really good. But what makes me the authority to go in anywhere to ask to do a lunch and learn? And So I sat on it for like a year. I didn't do anything with it. I just kind of like, how do I prepare? Well, one day the light bulb moment just happened. I thought, well, we have a community college in our that's close by. And so there are connections into the college. There were people that I could talk to. So I just picked up the phone, called and said, can I come in and have a meeting about doing a lunch and learn at the college? And they said, well, sure, come right in. So I will kid you not. I didn't really have a portfolio prepared, but I had a couple of ideas about what I could share. And by the time that I got done with this conversation, I was not asked my credentials. I was not asked anything other than, we don't want to do this as a free offering, a lunch and learn. We want to give you a contract. We want you to come in and to prepare, you're just going to put together a short description, a long description of the courses that you want to teach that we talked about today. And you're going to get paid to do this. And that's how it started. So my delay in thinking I had to have more authority, that wasn't necessarily true. So again, that excites me about this work because a lot of people think that they have to be qualified in a certain sort of way when really the qualification is all of your lived experience. Because I had a ton of lived experience in my career. So I had very much a sounding board that I could use for my authority.
That's excellent. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. I feel like the greatest qualification you've got to be a coach or in this sort of space is life, isn't it? You know, you can't lead others down a path if you haven't walked it yourself. I couldn't agree with that more. And that always makes me really skeptical if when I see 20-year-old life coaches or young gurus, I'm thinking, you haven't experienced life yet. How can you speak to the masses? How can you inspire? And that gives me a really good point, I think, to move on to the podcast, isn't it? When me and Max took feedback about the first series of the podcast, one of the comments that come back to us is, have we pigeonholed it? Have we only made it open to a certain audience? Would it be better with a female voice? And I think that leads on really well into this next question. Why men? I know you've obviously got your own podcast, you've got your own coaching practice. Why men? Why did you pick this area? Why did you think that maybe you would have a greater influence, a greater knowledge base, a greater opportunity to help guys, if that was?
Yes, actually, I didn't choose it. It chose me. I actually went on a podcast as a guest to a community. And actually, the topic of the podcast was tell your life story, very much about what we started with today. And through that, there was so much positivity in what I could bring as a helper, a support person, somebody that could sit with another person and help them. And so really what had happened was, I got noticed. I was asked later, would you like to participate in International Men's Day? And would you like to do it from the presence of the United States? Because this was a Canadian or is a Canadian organization. And I said, yes, I'd love to do that. And so I got into the group chat because that's what we do when a lot of times we do collaborations. We get in a group and I was finding that there are all of these different events that were happening, right? And I asked to be along and guess what happened? Why are you here? You're a woman. Why are you here? And I thought, so that was my motivator is women should be a part of the conversation. Men and women coexist. And the better that we can understand each other, the better off that we're going to be. And ultimately, if you have healthy, productive men and women in society, they breed that for their children, for their communities and beyond. And so really there's a lot more spaces for women as a, I guess you would call it a class. And so for men, there isn't as much. You get the backlash. You get the like, well, men, white men especially, have an advantage. And so why would you go and help them when they already have the extra advantage? And I said, no, that's not right. Just because you have maybe an advantage doesn't mean that you don't want to grow as an individual, as a collective. And so why wouldn't you bring people together? So it's really a number of things that have motivated me to do this work. There are times where it can be hard. This work that coming from a female perspective in the men's space, you have a lot more to prove for your authority and why you should be at the table. However, through those conversations, that's where the shift in the perspectives begins to happen when people actually come together and have an opportunity in a safe space to start the dialogue, which is what we're doing with the Masculinity Unmasked podcast.
Absolutely. There's so many different angles that we could go with that. I'm a big believer that sometimes your niche finds you, if that makes sense. Sometimes your face, accent, your mannerisms, your life experiences, whatever it does, fits your profile, doesn't it? Yeah, and that's an amazing thing in coaching, is having that flexibility, having that openness to help guys. I think that's amazing. One thing we talked about off air was, with the associate coaching that I do, I openly see lots of men want to speak to women. You know,
That's
they
true.
sometimes feel a little nervous, or maybe it's that wall of male ego. Sometimes they're not quite comfortable talking about deeper issues, to other men. But we're both in a similar space. Both are slightly different, unique niches. Would you say? The Masculinity Unmasked was created by me and Max so guys could have those chats, the ones they maybe can't quite have in the pub or the changing rooms at football with their friends, or the office, or whatever it might be. Those sometimes awkward chats where they want to get information. Maybe AI can't give it to them. And I feel like this is a valuable space for that, isn't it? So what are the sort of challenges? What are the most common problems that you see men in particular come to you with? I know you're across the pond. All right. Me and Max are from the UK, but I feel some men's problems are universal, if that makes sense. Doesn't matter if you're from the UK or the US. So what's the most sort of like common problems that you see them having?
Yes, there's the whole spectrum. There's such things as loneliness, wanting to find your purpose, making a career shift. There can be relationships. That's the number one thing behind the scenes. I get asked, this is going on in my relationship. What can I do? What do women really want?
Yeah.
The dating right now, I would say it's changed so much from the swipe left, swipe right mentality. It all goes back to basics and communication. If you have good communication, establish trust, then you can build a relationship. And there's great ways to go about it in a healthy way, and there's not so good ways to go about it. Boundaries come up all the time, time management, commitment. Let's see. I mean, really all of it. There's nothing that hasn't been, I don't think there's anything that I haven't been asked or talked about, and some of the hard stuff too. And some of
Yeah.
it you might be a little more reserved to ask. And so to actually have a conversation about women and doing it in a safe place. And the person's not your wife, not your girlfriend, not your mother, not your boss, not your coworker, any of those things. And so really it's having that outside person that will actually, when done right, will tell you the things that need to be said. And you may or may not want to hear them, but they're going to be given to you in a nurturing kind way, but yet at the same time, challenge your beliefs, challenge some of your thoughts, and really stretch your ability to be flexible for other perspectives. I mean, that's ultimately the benefit of a man working with a female coach.
Absolutely. Being a sound, though, doesn't it, with a woman, if that makes sense, it's a lot more of like an honest, open space, isn't it? And I think that's really, really important. What I think with relationships and dating, it's a good reflection of what's going on in the world right now. If you look at how dating changed, let's say how my parents met, they would have met organically. They met at the workplace, right? That's how people used to work, in pubs and restaurants and nightclubs and whatever, in the workplace. Okay. And then Tinder, Bumble, whatever come across. And it was quick fixes, aesthetics, AI, online, not quite real. When we're humans, animals by nature, if that makes sense, and we go on, impulses, pheromones, intuition, gut instinct, all that sort of stuff, that went out the window when that sort of stuff come in. And it was all about aesthetics, all about seeing it a little bit more clinical. I also think that's a reflection of what's happened in life. If we look at how people manage themselves on LinkedIn or social media, whatever, it's like it's a little bit more robotic than autonomous, and like it was in the past. Yeah, a little bit not so natural anymore. Do you see this getting worse in the men's space for the people that you speak to? We're here for
Um,
the Masculinity Unmasked to have those awkward conversations to help guys. I think in this space, a lot of people talk about doom and gloom. I think a lot of it, if you look at the news, is that things are getting worse. All the protests in the UK and in the US, all this sort of stuff, that things are getting worse. I'm not so sure they are in the personal development space. I actually think some things are getting better. What's your spin on that? Are you someone who's looking at this from, doom and gloom, perspective, worried about the future? Or are you someone that is looking at it, you're a little bit more optimistic, remembering what I'm saying about dating almost being like a reflection, a lens of how you look at sort of, life today?
it's interesting that you asked the question, do I think it's getting worse? Right? Is like it's not getting. It is worse, but I'm not looking at it necessarily from the gloom and doom. I'm looking at it from, there could be an opportunity here to really go back to basics with interpersonal communication. Because what's really happening is people are going into the whole dating with a scorecard. They must have this, this, and this. And then they also project, what they want onto the other person. They pretend there's somebody else. And I've always said to the men that I've talked to, do you really want to put out there who you're not? And that person then becomes attached or falls for you and you're not the person. And then they're like, well, who are you? So really the opportunity is the preventive piece of it. And it really starts with, like, for me, it starts with my sons. I want to give them a healthy view on relationships and dating. And we do talk about it. And so my sons are 15 and a half and 20 and a half. And so we do have these conversations there. So yes, it does look like the doom and gloom that you said. I think of it differently. I think of it as it's a warning that we need to start now to shift the trajectory, because it might take a decade to shift again the culture of how and when we date and what that looks like. And the only way we're going to get started on it is to advocate what healthy relationships look like and have tools that are easy to activate, that people can jump behind. And again, I still believe that back to the basics of, you can meet someone online, you could develop a very good relationship, but then take it offline and then see where it goes, and be willing to be, I guess, open and vulnerable, but only at the pace that you feel safe, because that's really, I think, it comes up a lot for men and women, that safety, should I, show up this way or that way? And what happens if, yes, the doom and gloom is in the mindset, I think, of what bad things can happen if I actually get close to somebody. If we're talking about it at the end of the day, what happens when I get close to somebody? Because they may have had an experience that wasn't so pleasant. And so that's what people tend to hold on to, rather than recreating what they want and going to the places and spaces to meet the type of people that they want. And I say that all the time. You can talk about men and women being shallow, not trying, and being fake and all these things. But you know what? You know what you want. So you got to go inward. You know what you want. You're going to hang out and be in spaces and present yourself in the way that that person sitting on the other side, man or woman, they're going to want to get to know you. You're going to want to get to know them. And so who cares about all this background of what could be out there that you don't want? Just focus on what you want and go after it. That's what I advocate. Yes. Okay. Okay. So there's a core value, because I also have a daughter too. That's the oldest. The two boys are at the other end of the age group. So really, what I guess as a parent, as far as the raising of my boys, I want them to be um, confident in who they are so they can express what they need to. I want them to develop discipline, to work hard. I want them to look to their relationships as something that's additive, not that you're completing this other half. And body image, working on that is, like you said, the physical fitness and even the career exploration. I have taken all of my kids on career exploration trips where they said they were interested in something. We just go do it. Sometimes it means I go say, hey, you're going to go do this. And, I don't actually put the gender on my kids when I'm going through this. And because I think that sets an interesting message to put them into a box. Okay, you're a boy becoming a man. This is what you got to do. You're a young lady. You're going into a woman. This is what you're supposed to do. And really, the healthiest thing that I can say for the development is that inner work of becoming who you are. And some of the things I learned later in life that I put out there for my kids are, that you don't have to follow all these timelines. Okay, like you have to go from high school to college, to get married, to have a house, to do all these things, and you have to do it by a set age. I think that doing that with the changing times is setting them up for unrealistic expectations and disappointment, to be honest. And you don't necessarily have to do everything in a trajectory. and by a certain age. And that's what I see a lot in the men that I work with, is that they are so set that I've got to do these things by these certain time periods. And I talked about coming alive when I was 45. Imagine being 25 or 35 and saying, I don't know who I want to be when I grow up. I went to college or I did some, entrepreneurship, and I'm like, I don't know what the heck I want to do. I don't know what my purpose is. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's all right. And actually, my youngest son, he had to write a paper, and he had to write it as a 40-year-old to his 12-year-old self. And you know what happened? Complete anxiety over that assignment, because he says, Mom, I don't know what I want to do. And I said, well, this is just a fictitious assignment. And so you know what we worked on together as a mother and son? I said, in that 40-year-old self, you're going to tell that 12-year-old self that you don't have to know what you're going to do, and forget the pressure of who you have to become and what you want to study. And just know that you could go through life and go through different career choices, and you can start at any time and just go out and explore the heck out of the world. Yes, yes. I would say that you don't have to know who you are as a static one-time thing. You're going to evolve and grow through all the different transitions and stages of life. And if you don't know, guess what? You can choose your own adventure and create the life that you want. And the only thing that I would say that is like the most important thing is that work on yourself and be the better version of yourself each iteration. If you can do that, you don't need to look to the left, to the right, what's on social media, what your neighbor's doing, because comparison they always say that's going to rob you of your joy, and it will. It will rob you of your joy. But imagine the joy that you can have when you have achieved certain goals that you set for yourself, and that you actually show up who you are. You feel good in your own skin. Men tell me all the time that I don't feel comfortable and good in my own skin. Well, the goal is to feel comfortable in your own skin all the time, not just that person that you let people see, but your whole person. And the only way you're going to do that is to live your life. Yes, of course, I have exciting projects, and the one that we're hosting, the Masculinity Unmasked podcast, is hosting the International Men's Day. And so we are building a program of keynote speakers, different perspectives to bring to the table. And we're working on something really special. We're going to have a panel put together where the men can share what they wish women knew about how we can best support them. And so we've also got women on the team. So the perspectives on the team, we practice what we talk about. So it's not just me. We've got other women on the team. We're excited to open up the conversation, and we're about learning. And so that is the biggest thing. And where you can find me, the easiest place is on LinkedIn. And so you can send me a message, you can send me a request, and that's really the best place.